Very good, thank you. I forgot to mention their announcements, the continued saga with my sister-in-law. If you recall, 2 weeks ago, I gave the happy birthday to her, and I expected that would be counted as number one. Well, yesterday was her birthday, and Rebecca again texted her first thing in the morning and wound up being first. So Rebecca again has the honor of being the first wisher of birthday wishes on her birthday. And so I sent her a text and said, you know, in capital letters, that I wished you a happy birthday nearly 2 weeks ago. And nothing. We got nothing. So we'll see. It sounds like there may be something in store for me, but from what I'm picking up on, it won't be pleasant. So a prank gift, yeah. So I don't know what that truly means, but just keeping everybody up to date because the continued saga of the family here. That's been going on. Well, here this morning we are in Numbers chapter 13, and a very familiar event. Perhaps one of the most familiar events of the Exodus, we could say it that way. But I think there's some great truths that apply to us today. Obviously there are, or it wouldn't be written for us. While there's gonna be no surprises. We know the scenarios, we know the circumstances, and there may be nothing that I say here this morning that is new to you. But I think we need to be reminded sometimes of those familiar events, just because we lose sight of the familiar in the unfamiliar, we say it that way. We know the truth, but when we're facing the unknown in our lives, sometimes we forget what we already know, and we forget to make that application. Certainly, David and Goliath have a constant application to our lives, and yet many times when we're facing that unknown giant in our life, we forget about a God who led David to victory, and we overlook that when we're facing that unknown, the giant. So here we will be looking at ultimately from chapter 13, verse 1 to verse 4 of the very next chapter. I don't know that I'll read all those verses, and certainly we are aware of the event. But before we dive into that passage, let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you again for who you are. I thank you for your word. I pray that again you'd allow me to decrease so that you alone would increase. I do again just ask that you be with the Miller family right now. Certainly we don't know the time. We don't know how many more minutes, hours, days that John will have here on this earth, nor do they. But I just pray that you would allow the time that they have to be precious. And I pray that even as they go through this, that they would be reminded of this passage. As we go through our trials, that we would be reminded of this familiar passage and make the application to our lives today, that what we see, what we look at, how we interpret it would truly have an impact in our hearts as we stand in awe again of you. And I just pray that you direct my words and as well our thoughts, our response to your word now. In Jesus' name, amen. We've looked at a number of things that we need to know. In fact, 20 so far. This is number 21. This morning we want to look at knowing our perception, or ultimately what we're looking at and how we interpret it. This passage here is, as you may have already seen if you've already opened up your Bibles in Numbers 13, is about the spies that are sent into Canaan to kind of check out the land. And for whatever reason in my mind, it takes me back to childhood and the flannel graph pictures. This allegedly is Moses. He's wearing the Rocky headband there. And the 12 spies as he's directing them to go out. Here's another flannel graph picture, if you recall. In fact, I almost remember this one.
I know, I think so too.
It seems like I actually remember that. Yeah, that's true too, yes. Of them carrying back the very large grapes between two guys. And it seems like I have one more, right? Nope, that was it. But anyway, as we consider the essence of this event, it's something that we've all heard from childhood, I'm certain. If you went to Sunday school, probably regardless of what church or denomination you went to, you probably are aware of what happened. But the question that I want us to ask this morning is what is our perception? How are we looking at life today, this week, this month? How are we looking at and interpreting what is taking place in our nation, in our world, in our homes, in our lives. Story is told, and I must admit, if I did know this, I have forgotten it, and there probably is much more that I've forgotten than that I still know. If that's possible, is that the right way of saying that? But allegedly, when the origination of the first original colonies here in this nation were started, the first year they started the town, the site. The second year they elected a town government. The third year the town government planned to make a clearing for a road that would extend 5 miles into the wilderness. That part I don't recall. I don't remember learning that. Again, I may have forgotten that. Or it may just be someone made an illustration and kind of fictionized what actually happened. I don't know those details, but anyway, I'll continue on. So the third year they wanted to make a road that headed west into kind of the unknown. The fourth year the people rebelled against that government that they had established themselves. Because they believed that they had no need for a road to go west. And so often, I think in our lives, we find ourselves, even though we may have crossed an entire ocean, we find ourselves, here's where we are and here's where we'll stay, and we don't have any need to go anywhere else. And here the children of Israel have traveled from Egypt, from slavery, from bondage, from cruelty, to the wilderness en route to a promised land that God has told them that is flowing with milk and honey. From that, a promise that was given to their father Abraham, and here they are on the borders of it. And as we know, the very end, the conclusion of this event, their response is, let's just go back home to Egypt. And their perception and the perception of these 12 men, more specifically 10 men, make a great impact on what's taking place here. I know as well, in fact, I was humming the song a little bit ago and mentioned to my wife this morning about the song that we probably all remember. 12 men went down to spy on Canaan. 10 were bad, 2 were good.
Should we sing it?
Probably not. What did they see when they got to Canaan?
10 so bad, 2 so good.
Exactly. Some saw giants big and tall. Some saw grapes in clusters fall. Exactly. Some saw God was in it all. 10 were bad, 2 were good. Now, when we would have Vacation Bible School, we'd sing that. We'd sing it over and over and over again. And every time you have to step it up a whole notch. Before long, I don't know how my wife was keeping up on the keys. And the kids were getting completely exhausted, which was the point. And as I was leading the song, had given up. Just getting dizzy, even with all the hand motions and the head motions and all of that. But the truth is, we have 12 men, and I think I have their names up here from verses 4 through 15. And I'm not going to read them because going over their names, much less their fathers' names, much less the tribes I should be able to make my way through. But here I have their name as it's spelled out, at least in the King James, there at the beginning. The numbers are obviously from the verse. And then kind of when I see it on the first one, I forgot the last there. Their pronunciation and then their definition of what the name means. Now keep in mind, back then, a name was very important as far as a child was named on a circumstance, an event, or something that the parents knew or had just learned about God. Today, many times names are picked out because they sound good, or it works well with the last name, or however that works out, or what is popular. You find the popular children's names and you pick one. Back in this day, a name was extremely important and it had great significance. And so if I can make my way down this list for a purpose, but bear with me. In verse 4, we read of Shammua, which means renowned. And then we have Shaphat, which means judge. And we call him Caleb. That's just an Englishnized form of it, but it actually was Caleb. To Yelp. Yigal, avenger. Hosea, deliverer. It'll be renamed Joshua. We'd find out in verse 16, which is very similar, Hosea and Joshua. Palti means delivered. Gadiel, fortune of God. And then Gadi also has that idea of fortune, literally just means an Israelite. Amiel, people of God. Sethor, hidden. Nakbe, to hide. And Gaal, majesty of God. Now I read all of those to point out that as these 12 men were chosen, God, in fact, let me read the verse. We're here in the very first couple of verses of chapter 13. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that thou may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send men, every one a ruler among them. And so their names and their position is of great importance. And these aren't just random men being chosen. These aren't just, well, you, and you go and you figure things out. These are men of position, they're men of importance, and even by their name have great significance of their leadership, their courage, who they were. What I find also very interesting is it's often been believed that Moses was not the only Israelite that was spared from the death sentence of children when the children of Israel were expanding too much, and Pharaoh and his wise men determined that this was a threat to them. Let's start killing off all the children, have the midwives kill the male born. It's believed that Moses was not the only one that was spared, and I would believe that probably be likely. I would say most parents would try to figure out some way to spare their child. And even some of that, I wonder if some of these are contemporaries of Moses in that regard, even as they're named to hide and hidden, and even deliverer and delivered. We don't know anything about who they are other than this list and their report later. But just their names and why they were named, it makes me wonder if some of these were actually very much contemporaries of Moses as far as same age bracket, and were spared death in similar fashions as Moses was. But nonetheless, we have these 12 men. Their names of great importance, their position of great precedence of leadership from every tribe. The guy was chosen. And so 3 things I want to point out very quickly before we get into the outline. Each of these names kind of envision quite a boldness, a courage, a power, a authority, or God doing something in and through them. In verse 2 again, all of these are rulers. Literally, it literally means exalted ones of each tribe. But in reality, as we look at these names, as we look in the Word of God and see them all spelled out, and even what their family name was, and as well their tribal name, we are reminded that we could put our names in there. 12 of us specifically could put our names right on this list, and in fact, that my challenge for us this morning is to put our names on that list. I don't even know how to pronounce most of those names, and not even sure if I did it correctly, even with the pronunciation there. But if we put our names on that list, I think it would help us as we face life today to ask ourselves the same questions that they had to ask themselves. And so the first question that we have, and ultimately is that question, what are you looking for now? What is it that we are, and in fact, my first point was, what are you looking for? But I know grammatically speaking, you're not really supposed to end a statement with what is that, like a preposition? And so I threw it now. So I'm finishing that statement correctly. But what are you looking for? That's just an easier way to ask it. What is it that we are looking for as we consider the elections and even to a point the chaos that surrounds us even still today? What are we looking for when we look at the virus and what we're dealing with today? What is it that we are looking for? When we consider even in our state and the governor's statements of certainly we have already been, as I mentioned last week, already knocked down kind of in mediations phase 1 of dealing with the virus, and a threat of going back a couple more steps in the mediation steps that he has laid out for us. Certainly we can look at that and ask ourselves again, what is it that we're looking for? As the Millers are dealing with what they're going through, as each one of us are facing health needs or financial needs or whatever else it might be, what is it that we are perceiving? What is it that we are trying to perceive in those situations? I was reminded back again, and may have said this too many times already again, but I will portray it again one more time. January 27, 2002, I read my resignation at the Bible Baptist Church in West Bend. I had been waiting for a position in the church for about 13, well, since I was about 13 years old. Really had longed to have a position of some sort, whether it be in a church or on a mission field or somewhere. And it took 13 years to finally get that position. And here, just a few years after getting it, I was resigning from it with a complete unknown before us. Had no idea where we were going to go next. And back in that November beforehand, things were starting to get a little dicey, how should we say it? Kind of like what's been going on, not to the same extent, but as our nation has been kind of in turmoil, our church was. And it was beginning to split into two, for and against the pastor, and things were really not going well. And kind of sliding me, kind of being the wedge between the two, and it has reached the point, starting in about November, end of January, it reached the point that I said, this isn't what I'm here for. I'm not to be that wedge. I'm not to be the umpire here. This is not my role, and I don't think it should be my role. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be fighting. We shouldn't be dividing. And so anyway, in November, when things started to kind of make it clear that this was going to progress in the way it was going, I had talked to my brother Bob in Altona and said, hey, something's going on. I don't, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And his thought was, hey, you need to get out of there quickly. This doesn't sound good. Just go. And well, obviously I'm the older brother, and my little brother can tell me some advice, but I'm still going to do what I think I need to do. So I didn't listen to him. But shortly thereafter, a week or two later, he called up and said, hey, a missionary that had just been to this church in the morning service went to his church in the evening service, as often happens with our missionaries. And both churches support, I think it was the Nolfs, if I'm not mistaken. The missionaries to Canada and living in Washington State at the time. It seems like it might have been the Nolfs. Anyway, they're from Galesburg area, so I really think it was the Nolfs. Anyway, they had told Bob when they were there that evening that they had just been here and they were looking for a pastor, and asked Bob if he knew anybody. So Bob called me up, hey, you remember that conversation we just recently had, and I told you to get out? Here's the church for you. Hey, here's the number. Call them and see what's going on. So I called, and voice answering machine, and it gave a number to call, and I called who wanted to be Pastor Al Lynn, who was the interim here, and talked to him very briefly, and he told pretty much it boiled down to send me your resume. Well, buckled back down at the church we were at and thought, we're going to make this work. We're really going to, let's try to fix this problem. Let's try to unite this church, and let's move forward. It was a large church, and I loved the church. I loved the people, loved that ministry, and was not too eager to leave it. Well, on that Sunday night, as I read my resignation, I woke up on that Monday, and for the first time probably the first time in my life, had no idea what Monday held. I had nowhere to go, no job, had no facet of an idea of where am I going, Lord, from here. And so in those first couple of days, I managed to find that number and call the church again. And I got that phone number for Pastor Al Lynn, called him again, and I asked him, I said, hey, is that position still open? You guys still looking for a pastor? This is our dude from West Bend, Wisconsin, and he says, yeah, I happened to call Tom Trumbull, who was the director of the AIBCI at that time, and Pastor Trumbull said something along the lines of, if you have the opportunity to have a Newtshorn be your pastor, you better take it. And so Al Lynn says to me, we've been waiting since you talked to us in November, because I called Pastor Trumbull immediately thereafter, and he said that we needed to get you as our pastor, and so we've been waiting. Can you come and preach for us? And I guess the rest you could say is history. But I remember that first week, the very next week after I resigned, we came to Toulon for the first time ever in our lives. Grew up in Illinois. Lived most of my life in Illinois at that point, and I had never heard of Stark County, had never heard of Toulon. By this time, Bob had already been in Altona for about a year and a half, 2 years, and first as a kind of a lay youth leader, then as a youth pastor, and then as a senior pastor. And so I had been to Altona several times visiting him, and no idea what Toulon was all about. So we came to Toulon that first weekend. I wasn't scheduled to preach, just came to check things out. And I remember that Saturday, we were actually visiting some friends of hers in, seems like Minnesota. We left Minnesota, came here, to Toulon that Saturday night and just drove through the town. What does it look like? And let's see if we can find the church, and let's see how big the building. There was no website. There was nothing to see, and so we found the church. Nobody's here, obviously, and we were looking. What was it that we were looking for? What was it when you're facing whatever your circumstance is? What is it that you are looking for? And how is it that we see our God in the midst of that looking? I recall that first Sunday we sat in about the row that, well, now it's probably the row that you guys are sitting in, because there was another 2 rows behind us at that point. But at that time we were like 3 rows from the back, which would be about where Mary sits now. That's because the pews went farther to the back. And it seems like Mrs. Dustin sat right across from us on the aisle. It almost seems like. I just remember there was an elderly lady who was by herself sitting across the aisle. And of all things, and I don't mean this in a bad way if you like this place, but after that first Sunday I didn't preach. I can't remember if you played the piano or not yet. She played the piano, but I didn't preach. And Pastor L. Lynn took us out for lunch, even though Bob, my brother Bob, I love roast beef. I'm way off topic here, but I love roast beef. And Bob, because we spent the weekend at my brother Bob's there, he says, hey, when you're done preaching or when you're done visiting, come back here and we'll wait for you. And I'm making this big roast beef meal. And so, the whole time I'm here listening to Pastor L preach, my mind is thinking, I'm getting hungry. I'm really hungry. Bob's making a roast beef today, and Bob's a great cook, and he has all the side dishes, and I'm really hungry. Well, then after the church service, Ellen says, hey, we're going to take you out for dinner. And I tried to quietly and yet persuasively say, oh, no, that's good. My brother's got a whole meal for us, and we're kind of looking forward to spending some time with family. Haven't seen him in a while. Oh, no, you came this far. You're going out to dinner with us. And he took us to the Red Apple in Kewanee. The Red Apple. And I'm thankful that, you can't complain about when someone else provides a meal for you, especially when they pay. That's great. But I can't tell you what it was like to eat at the Red Apple in Kewanee when I knew that my brother was in Altona eating my roast, eating my mashed potatoes. And he made probably some sort of pie afterwards and eating my pie. You can't fathom what it was like to eat at the Red Apple knowing all of that. The truth is what are you looking for? What were we looking for? When we were facing circumstances, what is it that we long to see? Here's some things that they were to look out for. Some things that they were to examine. Now let me back up. Deuteronomy chapter 1, as Moses is reviewing history, Deuteronomy chapter 1 includes something that Numbers chapter 13 does not include. Deuteronomy 1, as Moses repeats their history before they, for the second time, cross into the promised land, this time all of them except for him, it is stated that God says, you have asked to send spies into the land, therefore I have stated that you should send 12 or 1 from each tribe. And so from Moses' reiteration of history, speaking God's words, he makes it clear that the people of Israel wanted to see what they were getting into before they got into it, and God agreed to it and told them to send those 12 names into the land. Numbers doesn't record that for us, but Deuteronomy chapter 1 does. So as we look at God's command, verses 1 and 2, send them, we have to jump down to verse 18 and see what it is they were to look for. This is important when we look at how they came back. And Moses sent, verse 17, and Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said unto them, get ye out of the way southward and go up into the mountain and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. And so they went up and searched the land in the wilderness of Zin unto Rahab, as men cometh to Hamath. And they ascended by the south, and came unto Hebron, where Alman and Sushai and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. And now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. And they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut from thence a branch with 1 cluster of grapes. and they bare it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. They went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel under the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them. And I'll stop right there. There were specific things, and I have them listed there. What was the land like? What were the people like? Were they strong? Were they weak? Were there few? Or are there many? Where did they dwell? And even more specifically, why did they dwell there? In other words, where are those cities or habitations located, and what is it that made them choose that spot? Is there water? Are there pasture? Why is it that they have settled there? Comment about their cities. And their houses, are they nomadic? Do they live in tents? Do they have established cities? Their housing, their region again, their trees, what's their produce like, even their vegetation, and the request was bring back some samples. And so those are the very things that they were sent to look for. Things that I think would be important. In fact, the first several there, we could almost say the first four to a point, were military questions. What are we getting into as we go into battle against them to one by one drive them out? The Lord has already said that he would drive them out, but certainly they understood their responsibility in that regard. And then the last two certainly would be more about the land that they would be inhabiting. In other words, we can almost say it this way in a human term. If we're going to be given all of this land and God's only going to give us one piece by one piece by one piece as we grow, we went over this probably a couple months ago now, where is it that we're going to start? Where's our starting point? What is it that we're going to want to begin? And so kind of give us a graph of where these places are and what's there. What's the water like? What's for our herds? What are they like? What is all entailed? I also want to point out, when we consider their adventure for 40 days, this was not like Lewis and Clark leaving St. Louis area and heading west for the first however many months of their journey as they went through the plains, and ultimately, especially if you consider Illinois. If you consider Illinois without the highways and the streets and the cities already established, making your way through Illinois would be pretty much, except for a few rivers you'd have to cross, you could pretty much explore anywhere. But once you got out west into the mountains, you would have to find the passes. You would have to find the means to get from one side to the other side. And there would be a trail. There would be a trail because the animals had already made it. Certainly up to a point, even the Native Americans would have already had those trails. And so you find those trails. When we send out these 12 tribes, and it even makes mention of it, was about verse 22 and verse 21, they're following trails. They're not exploring this like Lewis and Clark of the Midwest Plains. There's really only one route that they're taking to explore this, and it's the route that everybody else goes. It's the route that the armies that overtake those areas have gone. It's the route that the shepherds have taken their flocks, although from my understanding the whole sheep aspect of it didn't come until the nation of Israel was there. But whatever they would have, their goats, their cattle of whatever sorts, they had those paths that made it through the mountains. AJ could certainly give more details of that area than I could, because he obviously is now living there and I am not. But it is a very mountainous area, not an Illinois area. And so as it makes their way through this, they're finding those paths and they're finding the roads that go from point A to point B, from city to city, from people group to people group, and they're taking note of those 6 things. But as we go through our life, as we go through our circumstance, what things are we searching for? As we go through COVID, what again is it that we are searching for? As we go through mitigation for COVID, what is it that we are looking for? As we face circumstances that seem beyond our means, what is it that we are looking for? After 40 days, verses 21 through 25, after 40 days, these men returned. They had no calendar, they had no clock, they had no walkie-talkies, they had no cell phones. The people back waiting have no idea how long they're going to be gone and how long it will take them to return. They're not even sure that they will return. But 40 days later, I'm guessing somebody sees them marching towards them on the horizon and gives the word, and it's probably spreads very quickly. They're back. They saw what they were sent to see, and now they're coming for the report. And we know the report, but let me read it, verse 26. Let me put up the next point because it'll help us. Keep note of those 6 things, because you'll see those 6 things just drop down to point 2. There they are. Verse 26, and they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel under the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. That was their last point. Look for the vegetation and bring us a sample. Here's Exhibit A. Here's the fruit of the land. And they told them and said, we came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely, as we have been told numerous times, it does flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Going back to where I started with the flannel graph, I can't tell you how many times as a child I wondered what the rivers were like that flowed with milk and honey, and I always wondered why the flannel graphs never showed rivers of milk and rivers of honey, because how else would a land flow with those two things? And I just remember as a child thinking those are the weirdest rivers I've ever heard of. The honey one sounds pretty good. The milk one does to a point, but just sounds really strange in a river. How is a land flowing with milk and honey? But what a representation of great fertility in the land. A land flowing with milk is obviously great signs of fertility. And probably more specifically in regards to the animal than humanity, but probably both involved. Milk and the honey. This is going to be good. This is going to be good for us. This is going to be, as we have been told, this is a land that is going to be good. Keep in mind, every one of those 12 men were born in Egypt. They were born in a land of, we could also say, that flowed with milk and honey. They were born in a very fertile area, and between that area and the land that they have been promised them has only been wilderness. They've wondered where they're going to eat. They've wondered where they're going to get water. They've wondered when relief would come. And they've complained about it repeatedly. Now they finally have on their horizon the land that God has promised them with the words of, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. And they come back and say, indeed it is. The first point, what is their land? It is true. It's flowing with milk and honey. But look at verse 28. Nevertheless, if we can step back to verse 27, remember after, just a few weeks after leaving Egypt, and they cross the sea. Remember what Miriam does after they cross the sea? Miriam starts up the band. She's dancing, and they're singing, and Moses has an entire song that he is singing with them, and Miriam is dancing. We don't have this recorded for us, but I'm guessing after verse 27, the people have gathered. 1 million people have gathered to hear the report, and the guy stands up and says, it is true! It's a land flowing with milk and honey. I've got to think Miriam starts her dancing again. And all excitement, and they're, yay! Hey, it's a land flowing with milk. We wanted it to be. It had to be. We're finally done with this wilderness. We're finally done with this dryness. We're finally done wondering where the water is going to come from. Excuse me. We're finally done with this wandering, and it is what we hoped it would be, what we were told it would be. It had to be this. And it is. The very next word in verse 28 says, nevertheless. Have you ever lived a time in life where you have a nevertheless moment? Things seem to be going really well. And from first vantage point, it seems to be great. Nevertheless. They're hiding in the shadows is something that isn't so great. But notice what they say. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land. That was number 2. They're strong. The cities are walled and very great. That was number 3. What were their cities like? Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. It was kind of like their people. Not only are they strong, but now they're going to get more specific. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb, or Caleb, still the people before Moses said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. Let me stop right there. If you look at the red, well, remember, the white is what we had for first point. What are we looking for? Those are the things they were sent to look for. What did they report? They gave the exact answers of what the white was. Their land is flowing with milk and honey. Their people are strong. And there's vast numbers of them. They have the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Canaanites, and all these groups of people. Their cities are indeed walled. Their houses are obviously protected from those walled cities. Their region are lots of people, many nations, and their vegetation is Exhibit A. They came back reporting exactly what they were supposed to report. That at this point, well, I read one too many verses, but at this point, they haven't said anything that was incorrect for them to say. They've given the answer of the very reason why they were supposed to go. They saw what they were supposed to see, and they reported it back. But the word that is used there of nevertheless indicates that their report, as it was given, is one that is, this isn't the good thing, this is the bad thing. And Caleb stands up and says, I didn't see it that way. Yes, every one of those, is their land flowing with milk and honey? I would dare say Caleb says, yes. Are there people very strong and, as pointed out, very tall? They're giants in some cases. Caleb would say, true again. Are there cities walled? Caleb would say, exactly, I saw it too. Is there housing protected in those walled cities? That too, I saw that. Is there a region there have lots of people groups, lots of nations involved? Absolutely. And is there fruit and vegetation very large? Here it is. We can't deny it. Caleb is not denying us anything that they have said. But what he is denying is their perception of it. There's a lot of times we see with our eyes truth. But in our minds we interpret it the way we want it interpreted, if we say it that way. We interpret it in human terms. Caleb saw the exact same thing, the exact same answers. And if Caleb would have been asked, he would have given the exact same description. But he probably would not have used the word nevertheless. He probably would not have said, we can't do this. Because what Caleb said was, oh yes we can. Continuing on, where did I leave off? I'll read verse 32 again. They brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched of the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come out of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. ... We can't do this. Let me ask you the one question that they weren't sent to answer. Can we do this? Moses gives them specific questions to go find the answers to. But the question that they were not given was, see if we can do this. He did not give them a question that says, develop a battle plan and how we can be victorious. He does not send them with a question as, are we stronger than they are? He just sends them with those questions and bring back the answer. But they've come back with an answer to a question that was never asked. And how many times do we do that, unfortunately? How many times do I do that, unfortunately, in life? We begin to answer questions that we weren't asked. We begin to conclude with conclusions we never should have concluded. I can't do this. Which many times is probably the case. Probably true. I don't believe that Caleb was saying they could do this. I don't believe that Caleb was saying they were stronger than any of these people. I certainly don't believe that Caleb was saying they were taller than some of these people. But what Caleb was acknowledging is that with the might of God, they could do this. But in all practical outlooks, that's what they saw. And they concluded the unasked question, we can't. Now, that was a question of what stops you. And shrinking that up again, what is our impact? Look at the first 4 verses of the next chapter. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. Can you imagine being Moses? Let me back up. Can you imagine being Moses, Caleb, and Joshua? They hired the entire people. Now they left with what was it, 600,000 men, and we conclude that with the women and children and even older men, because 600,000 men of battle-worthy men were 600,000. You add in all of the other children, the women, the younger boys, and the older men that were no longer battle-ready, surely we are well over 1 million people. Now we know that they've already had one attack from behind. Remember, their distant cousins came and attacked them, and it seems that some of them have already died. God has already killed off, for lack of a better word, several of them as well, because of their unbelief. But I've got to still believe that there's still got to be about 1 million people, easily, still in their numbers. Could you imagine 1 million people crying all night? In the last 3 months, we've had riots in our land, but they have never come close to this. Now, I'm not saying that they're burning things, because there's no buildings to burn. There's no police car to shoot at, or a policeman to shoot at, or police cars to overturn and set on fire. And certainly not to the extent that's been taking place in our nation. But can you imagine the outcome of 1 million people weeping all night? And all the children of Israel, verse 2, murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? Look at verse 4. They said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return unto Egypt. Moses and Aaron, you are no longer our leaders. We're going to elect a captain, and that captain is going to take us back. We can't do this. In conclusion, again, nothing is new here. We know this passage. But what is it as we face life and circumstance? What is it that we're looking for? What stops us? What is that nevertheless moment in our life where we say, here's what I see, and so here's how I'm going to conclude it? And we jump to conclusions that we should never have even concluded, should never have even asked. What stops us, those nevertheless moments? And then, as we consider our conclusion, I think the humbling question is to ask, what is my impact? Think of this. 10 men led 1 million people into weeping all night. 10 men led 1 million people into crying out and saying, Moses and Aaron, we've had enough of you. 10 men led 1 million people to say, let's raise up a new leader and let's go back. We've had enough. 10 men had the wrong conclusion. The music has stopped. There is no more dancing. There is no rejoicing. They've looked at the grapes. They've heard it is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey, but they've heard the word nevertheless. And in answer to all the questions they were sent, they were led to believe that the conclusion was unanimous. We can't do this. The people are strong. The cities are walled. City walls are great. There's lots of people. We saw the annex and the Amalekites and Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Canaanites. And there's even some giants that made us look like grasshoppers. There's just no way we can do this. Did they see anything that they weren't supposed to see? No. Did they miss something that they were sent to see? It doesn't seem that way. But it's amazing how 10 men changed the hearts of 1 million people. If you cut that down, I'm not saying statistically it's possible to cut that down, but can you imagine the impact of one person? 100,000 people impacted by one person, if you put it statistically down to one. Can you imagine the impact that we have on the lives of others when we conclude we can't? When God says, that wasn't the question for you to ask. That wasn't what I had you going for. I didn't send you to see if we could. I sent you because you asked, Deuteronomy chapter 1 says, so that you would know the land, so you'd know the people, so that you would know what was ahead. There would be no surprises, but it wasn't to see if we could. I sent you to show you we can. To show you what I will do. And I love the fact that, in fact, this has happened in our life, in our home, in our family. There have been numerous times where we faced what seemed to be impossible, and with a great attitude, we moved forward, and it was more of a, let's see what God's going to do now. And we rejoice at what God did now. But I can't say that always happens, because human nature kicks in, just like these 10 men, and says, I don't think we can. I'm not sure it's possible. And isn't it amazing how that has an impact on lives beyond even us? 10 men, 1 million people, ready to turn around and go back home, as they stood on the shores of the land that God had promised them. Responding to chaos, whatever our chaos is at the moment, what are we looking for? And are we reminded that what we see and how we interpret it will have an impact on others? What a great thing when we can look at whatever it is. You call it the election, you can call it COVID, you can call it a financial need, you can call it whatever it is. We look at it and we can have confidence. I see the mountain, but I know that God is sufficient. I know God is going to do that. And imagine the impact that we can have in that regard as well. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for your word. I thank you for familiar passages that we can review. But I pray that we'd be able to learn how to apply them to life today. That as we are ultimately at times those spies to see the unknown before us, and our minds quickly can conclude the neverthelesses, we'd be reminded how often we leave you out of the equation. How often our conclusion leaves our solution void of a God who knows no limits. How often our conclusions leave us focused solely on us while closing our eyes to you. And I pray that in so doing we'd be reminded how 10 men influenced 1 million people because they concluded a solution that didn't involve you. And I pray that you would challenge our hearts in that regard, that regardless of what we face before us, that we would be reminded of you, that we would see you, that we would be like Caleb and say, let's go take this, because you are with us. And I pray that you would use us as we face the circumstances, as we face the mountains, as we face the giants, whatever they may be in our path today, that we would rejoice in you. And we give you the glory for it. In Jesus' name, amen.